Hi, I'm Randy Williams and I'm back again, this time to show you the Chum Q form. Now the name Chum Q means seeking the bridge being the forearm. We call the forearm the bridge because we have to cross that to get to our opponent and he has to cross ours to get to us. It's also considered Chum Q when you murder your pal. Get it? Chum Q. Chum Q mainly trains the waist and stance. It brings in various footwork to support the hand techniques that we learned at Siu Tao level. You develop pivoting power at Chum Q level, which in turn leads you to the concept of yin-yang motion and then to the concept of reference. Kicks are also formally introduced in this form. We also develop what's known as ngan geng, or eye-focusing power. And we develop that by staying relaxed and focusing our eyes on fast-moving motions. This helps us to learn to stay calm in the midst of furious action and in a way to slow our surroundings down a little bit. Now, as its name implies, Chum Q contains quite a few bridging concepts. Running, including and excluding the opponent's bridge from above and below, jamming the bridge, creating a bridge, sinking the bridge, trapping the opponent's bridge, parrying, and joint locking the bridge are all cleverly hidden within the form. So as Led Zeppelin said on the Houses of the Holy album in the Crunch, "Where's that confounded bridge?" All right, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Hoi Sik sequence and Sup Ji Sao Quan Sao sequence. That was explained back at the Siu Tao tape. But again, we do all the beginnings of the forms the same. Siu Tao, Chum Kyu, Biu-ji all start the same way. And the reason for that is, once you've learned all three of them, what we start to do is we leave off the end of Siu Tao and the beginning of Chum Kyu and blend that together. Then we leave off the end of Chum Kyu and the beginning of Biu-ji and put that together so we can do one long form. So that's why all three forms start the same way. So what we do is we cross the arms left over right with about a fingertip distance between the arms. Then we roll inside, pull, and then bend. I'll just stop right there and explain what I'm talking about here. First of all, when I cross my arms, there should be one finger distance between my arms and one fist distance from my elbow to my body. And what I try to do while I'm circling here is to maintain that same distance of a fingertip, to the point where I could just feel the hair of the arms touching one another, but I don't actually feel the skin touching one another. Now, that sequence alone already has some application. First of all, when I cross my arms in this way, this is designed to sink my chest and make it sort of collapse and start what we call reverse breathing, which means rather than to inflate the chest like this and make yourself top-heavy in Wing Chun, what you'd rather do is inflate the stomach and make your center of gravity sink. So when I go like this, what I'm doing is really just taking a breath in and beginning the reverse breathing. Now, when I roll through to what's known as Quan Sao, the most important thing here is that I don't touch myself during this movement. Now, my mom always used to say, don't touch yourself. But that was, I think she meant something else. But anyway, from right here, when I roll through, I try not to touch myself in any way. Now, this is teaching me the crucial sort of spatial relationship between my two hands at all times. It teaches me to move my hands in a tight space without bumping into one another. Now, an example of that is like when I'm moving later on at high speed doing all my different techniques, what I don't want to do is sort of like bump into my own hand here or like sort of clamp my own hand or anything else like that. A lot of times when you're first learning Wing Chun, you'll like accidentally punch your own hand when you're doing the punching sequence. That sort of thing means that you haven't quite developed enough of that skill of knowing where your hands are at all times in relation to the other person. All right, now that skill is sort of further extrapolated to include the arms of the opponent. You see, once I make contact with my opponent's hand, his arm becomes sort of an extension of mine. And knowing where my arm is at all times will help me know where his is. In other words, it would be stupid for me right now to punch right there because I know I'm going to run into his hand. Because I know where his arm is, I know how to go under it or over it or how to get it out of the way so I can punch on the line that I want. So in this sense, knowing where my hand is at all times helps me know where his hand is at all times. All right, now after the Hoi Sik sequence here, opening the stance into what we call Yi Ji Kim Young Ma. Now as you'll recall in my previous tape series I explained why it's called the character 2 goat restraining stance. And that was because the Chinese character 2 looking like a short line and underneath it was a long line. So if you drew one on the floor, short and then long, and then stood on it, heel and toe, you'd have that number 2 vibe going. Now, it's also called goat restraining stance because of the way you have your feet turned in. So like if you were being pulled forward, like let's say by a goat or another strong animal with a low center of gravity, you'd be able to resist its pull. So like the calf ropers or anything else. Or like when you, kind of like when you go down a steep slope and you turn your feet sideways to keep yourself from sliding because you want to have more width of the foot in the direction you want strengthened. Well, by turning your toes in like this, you strengthen your direction forward and backward so that it's harder to push you back or pull you forward than it would be if your toes were forward. And you remember in the last tape series I did, I talked about how you'd get strength in your chest and back and shoulder from turning your feet at a 45-degree angle. Now this stance is also designed to create a pyramidal structure. In other words, we imagine an hourglass shape with 2 pyramids intersecting, one going across your shoulders and going down to the floor, and another at the floor coming up and up to what we call the dantian, or seat of strength, the center of gravity. Now the intersection then would be at the knees, and that's where you need the strength. Now when you do this stance, you want your pelvis to be up and your knees to be bent, and that locks that structure together. So that what will happen is if you let your pelvis down like this or straighten your knees too much, you break the connection between those 2 pyramids. So what you really want to have is a nice strong connection of the hips up and the knees bent. Now some other characteristics of this stance: you want your back to be pushed out. You want your elbows and waist and shoulders to be sunk. And your wrists don't touch the body. There should be 1 fingertip distance between your wrist and body. Now what you want to have is your head and neck straight and your toes gripping the ground inside your shoes. Now there should be, as I said before, 1 fingertip distance between your wrist and your body right here. All right, now that creates that pyramid structure. Now all footwork and all kicking comes from the Yi Ji Kim Young Ma stance. In other words, this structure, when pivoted, becomes Cho Ma. And any footwork that we do in Wing Chun, whether it's step slide or step through or reversing, any footwork that we do would be based on Yi Ji Kim Young Ma, because every leg is nothing but half of that stance, turned in whatever direction you need. Even when we kick, say a front kick, the 2 halves of that front kick are both the halves of the leg. Even when I go to side kick, the stance is basically the same. See, there's a proverb in Wing Chun that says, when I kick, my heels point to one another. And when I open the stance, that bit right there introduces me to the fact that the heels point to one another when I kick. So it's also the root of what we call Duk Lap Ma, which is the independent horse stance. So when I'm here and I bend my knees open, that there could then be what we call Duk Lap Ma, independent horse. And we practice this one-legged stance. All right, next I'm going to talk about the Sup Chi Sao, Quan Sao motion of the form. Now, first of all, Sup Chi Sao, the character 10 hand, it's called that because in Chinese the character 10 looks like an X and that hand looks like an X hand. Now, what I can do is use either half of this to kind of like a low Bu Sao. In other words, once we're in an open position against low shot, I could use it here, straight down to stop that, or the other one here. So half of it could be used as a block. Now, another time I would use Sup Chi Sao in its entirety would be like in sticky hands. If Gavin tried to get me by the neck and knee me, I could use that to stop that knee shot from coming in. So it's good for that. Another time that we would use at least half of the Sup Chi Sao motion is in a headlock situation. Say I'm headlocked. I might use something here to soften him up a little bit, stomp his foot, then use that shoot of the low Bu, then jack the knee. So that would help me escape. So what I did again once I softened them up here and stomped the foot, I just inserted my fingers through that small gap and shot half a sup chi sao. That got me out and enabled me to jack the knee. All right, now I want to talk about the roll up to Kwan sao from the sup chi sao motion. Kwan sao means rolling hands block. Now, the Kwan sao motion is actually the root of what's called loi Kwan sao and ngoi Kwan sao, inner and outer rolling hands block. Now, first of all, in this case, we can use the sup chi sao motion to simulate being trapped. Because a lot of times in Wing Chun, what the guy wants to do is trap and hit. So you also have to learn how to defend against being trapped. So what Kwan sao enables me to do is roll out of a trap and stop that guy from trapping me. See? Slowly, I bring my other hand up, roll it, and stop that shot. Now, what I could do here is once I've done that position, I could just do that again and do that second one with sort of an offset timing. Now, that same offset timing could be used with double Kwan. For example, if we're closed and Gavin did a pak punch on me, say from here, where you look at my bottom hand is rolled out into that bong. Then from here, I could just roll that up. See? So that is, again, use of that double rolling or offset timing. Now, it's also the root of what's called loi Kwan sao, which is the inside rolling hands block, which is a combination of hyun sao and jam sao. This is another version of Kwan sao. Now, the time I would use that, let's say we were open. Now, against a single punch, what my intention was really to do would have been to open him up and just paste him down the middle. But instead, I've done what I call opening a can of worms. Because when I thought I was opening him up, I'm actually facing a punch. So I don't like that. So what I use loi Kwan sao for is to close that can of worms that I just opened up. Now, there's a proverb in Wing Chun that says, go with opponent's force using a rolling motion, then turn the situation around to control them. And this is a good example. Now, another thing that's brought to mind by this roll-up is, again, unscrewing the hand, screwing on a fist, you get what's called loi fan kun, one of the 8 punches of Wing Chun, inside whip punch. So all you had to do is blend together with the yechi chung kun idea, with the Kwan sao idea, and you get the inside whip punch, which comes in a lot. Let's say we're open, Gavin gives me the jab here. Well, I can't just punch, I can't just go straight through, I have to whip around. So that helps me go out and around an obstacle. I wouldn't just, in other words, out of thin air, I wouldn't just whip my hand that way. I'd just go straight in. But in a situation where there's something blocking the center line, you've got to go out and around it. That's when you'd use your whip punches. Now, another time when you might want to whip your hand is if you have to punch twice in a row with the same hand, because you can't just, you need to have a little whipping power. So if we're closed, we do an exercise called the closed attack cycle. When Gavin gives the first punch, I did tan. The second one was jeep. And then I go gum. Now I want to hit again with this hand to start the cycle again. So I need to roll it. Jeep, gum, tan, jeep, gum, tan, jeep, gum. You see? So I had to roll my hand in the same way. Now, another thing about the sup chi sao, Kwan sao sequence here is it introduces us to the 2 main types of power used in Wing Chun. The first one being jut ging, or jerk power. The second one being bao jia ging, or explode power, whip power. See, the first one, you snap everything out with sort of a jerking snap. The second one, you whip it with sort of a sizzling of the hands. And that's what we call bao jia ging, whip power. All right, next I'm going to talk about the Chum stance pivot. Now, it's introduced here with the punch, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. But right now, I just want to talk about the pivot itself, Chum, which actually means sitting horse. It's the first of the 5 basic moving stances of Wing Chun. And this particular movement in the form introduces Chum to us. Now, it's set actually by the Yiji Kim Young Ma in the first form. Because when you opened your stance here, that sort of set 2 base legs, or two pivoted legs. It's just that they both happen to be pivoted inwards. But at the very beginning, they told you how to have your heels wider than your shoulders and your feet at a 45-degree angle, your knees bent so you couldn't see your feet, and your pelvis up. That sort of set the stage for what we call Chum. You see, all you have to do in the beginning of the first movement of the form is pivot on the heel of the foot till the angle of your 2 feet match one another with that punch. Well, let's just don't worry about the punch right now. But what happened was you still couldn't see your foot. You pivoted out on the heel, and you just maintained the same leg structure here and same here, as if your leg was in a cast, and all you did was take that whole assembly and pivot it outwards. Okay? That, I talked a little bit about that in my last tape series, so you can go back and watch that for a little bit more detail. But in any case, this is where the Chum is introduced in the form. Now, it's very important that you pivot on the heel of the foot, and this is where they tell you. Now, a lot of times beginners make the mistake of pivoting on the ball of the foot. So what happens is they turn like this, and they end up going off kilter. They end up shifting the whole center of gravity from one side to the other. That's not what you want to do in Wing Chun. Wing Chun wants to stay put on the heels and pivot, turning your feet almost like windshield wipers. And they both turn at the same angle at the same time. Now, if they wanted you to turn on the ball of the foot and lean way back like this in Wing Chun, then back at Yiji Kim Young Ma, they would have told you to go like this, because that's how you look when you pivot this way. So you don't want to pivot in that manner. And one of the sayings in Wing Chun is "Lik Yao Gan Sang." That means power is born in the heels. They don't say power is born in the balls of the feet. They say it's born in the heels. Now let me show you why we don't want to pivot on the ball of the foot. When Bobby comes up, what happens is, if I don't pivot at all and just show the basic punch, here, that punch is coming up a little bit short of his face. Let me just move to where it's just right at his chin. Now, if I pivot incorrectly on the ball of the foot, what's going to happen to my punch is it's going to become shorter, and I'm going to be moving away from him. That's not what I want. What I want to do is pivot on the heel of the, by pivoting on the heel, I make my punch longer. See? So when I pivot on the heel, it gives me the desired result. So just a little difference in the way you pivot makes a big difference in your whole Wing Chun structure. Now, when you pivot, you want your toes to move fast. You don't want to pivot and have your toes drag behind. Your toes should move as fast as possible from one side to the other. And what you're trying to do is use that hourglass structure that I talked about in the Siu Lim Tao tape. You're going to try to use that to create more power. Now let me explain that a little bit more. If I had an hourglass here, shaped like that, and I grab the bottom of it and I just turn it like this, obviously if the connection is solid between the upper and lower pyramid, when I turn this, the top's going to turn with it as a unit. But if I were to somehow weaken that connection, break it or melt it, when I turn this, this would just flop over. Now the same thing with my stance. If I weaken the connection by dropping my hips or by straightening my knees, then when I start power downstairs, nothing's going to come out through the upper pyramid. It's all going to be lost here. Okay? So it's very important that you remember to keep the pelvis up and the knees down. You don't see your feet. And even when you pivot and you look down, you should not see your feet. If you can see your feet, you're doing one of two things wrong. You either have your legs too straight, or you have your pelvis down like this, or maybe you have big feet. But in most cases, if you can see your feet, you're doing one of those two things wrong. Now, one of the reasons why at Yiji Kim Young Ma level I told you to keep your heels out wider than your shoulders is to help create a sort of a wider gearing ratio. Now, some of you guys work with machinery. You know that if you have a gear that's this big, driving a gear that's half the size, that every time the big one goes around, this one's got to go around twice to keep up with it. Now, myself, I work in printing, and a lot of the printing rollers work that way. Well, the Wing Chun stance is similar because you have a bigger gear driving a smaller gear. So for every time that this pivots X amount, whatever degree, this has to pivot just a little bit more, so it has to go a little bit faster. And this is one of the ways that Wing Chun is kind of like a smart shopper or a cheapskate, like I talked about it at Siu Lim Tao level. You try to get the most for your money, the most power and speed you can for the effort and time that you have to expend. Now, one of the sayings in Wing Chun says, Yu Ma Chai Dong. That means that the waist and stance move together. Another one of the sayings of those Sup Chet Yu that I read earlier, Yu Ma Yu Hup. The waist and stance must be united. All right, next I'm going to talk about the actual punch that takes place with the stance pivot, what's called Cho Ma Yachi Chungken. You read the stance turn first, followed by the technique that's going with the stance turn. Now, this is a stance pivot, character sun, thrust punch. It really introduces us to the basic point of reference, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more. When we get to the Lan Sao and Bong Sao later in the form, I'm going to start talking more about reference. But this introduces us to the fact that all Wing Chun striking motions are yang in nature, yang of yin and yang. One of the proverbs of Wing Chun says, Sao Fat Yu Yum Yang. That means hand techniques have to be yin and yang. Now, one of the things that we talk about with reference is the fact that when we punch, all of our punching is always on the positive or forward-moving side of the pivot. And like I said, I'm going to go into that a little bit more later. Now, pivoting with your punch adds that extra oomph to it. At Siu Lim Tao level, you just learned how to milk your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist, your fist for all it was worth, without anything else helping it, just this alone. But at this point, they're saying, all right, now you know how to get power out of your arm. Now let's add that stance pivot to it and give it that little bit of extra power. Now that's good for when you're just hitting someone. It also helps you with your including and excluding. Now, when Kenny comes in, One of the things that I do with a stance pivot, include here, this helps me sort of knock his hand in, or exclude, this sort of helps me knock his hand out. Okay? Now, by pivoting, I've given myself a little bit of extra power in the inclusion and exclusion. What happens is, instead of, let's say we were just face dead on straight and that punch came. Now, if I was trying to include it and I just didn't quite have enough strength in my arm, what's happening is I'm not able to push his arm in. But by adding that pivot to it, what it does is it changes the angle. Not only does it give me more power, but it slightly changes the angle that I'm trying to approach. So instead of trying to come in on the same angle and like force his hand where it doesn't want to go, I can say now, all right, let his hand go where it wanted to go in the first place because mine's coming in from a different line. So I can include this way, and that helps me come in with a little bit less force being used. All right, next I'm going to talk about the way that I stretch my arm open and then circle and snap across. Now, first of all, stretching my arm open like this gives me more concept of how to stretch, how to get the most elastic power out of my punch, let my punch fly to its full extension. So we're stretching out the tendons of the arm and the shoulder. Then when I bring this circle in, again, I'm strengthening and flexing my wrist, getting a little bit more flexibility, and I'm also being trusted now to snap a little bit more. In Siulum Tao, we don't really emphasize anything. But at Chum Q level, we're able to start emphasizing a little bit more of the snap. So this is helping us add a little bit of snap to the end of a circle, which is going to translate to a lot of the other techniques that we do. Now, one of the things that we want to do is load up with a circle into a snap. For example, like when I'm doing just a repeated tan da technique. Here, I'm loading up with a circle into a snap, loading up into a snap. Or like Hyun Da Chang Dai Jiang. Here again, I'm loading up with a circle and then snapping it out. Loading up with the circle and snapping it out. All right, next I'm going to talk about the Chum Chekun, or the stance pivot with the retraction extension punch. Now this one, again, it's an example of what we call Yi Ying Bo Sao, or the stance helping to support the structure of the hands. Now when I use this movement, what I'm actually doing is pulling one in and sending the other one out, which introduces us to the idea of using centrifugal and centripetal force. Centrifugal force meaning, you know, when something spins, it throws power out. Centripetal force, the drawing in power of something spinning. So you have both happening when you do this, because one's coming in and the other one's going out. Now, what you want to do again is make sure that you're pivoting completely on your axis and not pivoting out and around like this. Because what's going to happen when you pivot this way is you get pure forward and backward power for centripetal and centrifugal force. See, if I pivot off kilter, then I'm throwing my whole technique sort of oblong. What I want to do is have perfect forward and backward power so that the one hand that's latching onto the sort of centripetal force pulls, and the other that's latching onto the centrifugal force shoots. So I want one going in and one going out. Now there's a proverb in Wing Chun that says, Chit Kin Yu Fai, means when your fist goes out it has to be fast. That's one of the Sup Chat Yu, or 17 musts of Wing Chun. And this is a great example of it. You've got to move those toes fast and send that punch out using the hip locked up and everything behind it. That's body unity, what's known as body unity, moving everything together as one. Now the punch itself should be relaxed and go to full extension. Don't stop it halfway. Sometimes you see a guy punch like this, and it might look strong because you can see all his veins popping out or whatever, but what that really means he's doing is holding the power in his arm. He's not letting it fly out. See, by stiffening up like that, you're actually locking your power in the arm and not letting it come out into the target. So, you know, you can draw the parallel of a guy driving a car hitting the wall. If you're wearing the seatbelt, you stay in the car, which is a good thing, obviously. But if you weren't wearing the seatbelt, you'd fly right through the windshield and hit the wall. Well, that's what Wing Chun power is kind of like, because if you stay stiff, you're seatbelting your power into the arm. But if you just stay relaxed and let it fly, when you hit something, your power is free to fly out of the car, and it's not seatbelted into your arm. Now, to use the sequence in the form of Chum Chekun, here's what could happen. Now, when John comes in, what I would normally do is pivot punch just for power. So, you know, just alone, that's how it's going to look, just pivoting in to get that extra oomph in your shot. But if I were going to use the exact sequence as it appears in the form, remember I go punch, stretch open, circle close, pivot, pull, punch. It could be done in a similar way. See, I would go like this. He blocks, I pull punch. Now what happened here is I went punch, open, circle closed, pull punch. And in this way I'm able to borrow John's power and pull him into the strike. All right, next I'm going to talk about jingma, or stance straightening. Jingma actually means straight horse, but we use it to mean turning the horse back to the center from the side. Now, not only does it help straighten the form up and make everything symmetrical, but it does have some combat applications. In fact, it shows you how Yiji Kimyungma, which normally is thought of as a training position, can actually sometimes be used in combat. Now, for example, if we're open, if I threw the cross and Gavin stopped that with Wusao, I could use Yiji Kimyungma to turn back in for power. But I didn't, turn so much that I showed him my back. If I would have used a full Choma pivot, that's what would have happened. He would have got my back. Now, I can also use Yiji Kimyungma to help lock his leg. In an open situation, say he gave me the jab here, and I'm like in this type of position, I can use Yiji Kimyungma to help me control his leg. Now, another time I use the Jingma position, or going back to Yiji Kimyungma from the side to the center, let's say that we're inserting the Lapsao changes into the roll. Now, when I'm doing Luksao with Gavin, here, we're in the center position. But once I start the Bu switch, for example, here, now we're back in Lap, I can use the Jingma to get it back into the roll. So now we both did a Jingma position back to the center. In combat sticky hands, every now and then I'll use Yiji Kimyungma as a fighting position. A good example would be, again, here from the roll. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll shoot Bu, step up punch, and then turn back to center with that last punch. That gives me a little bit extra power, but it doesn't turn my back to my opponent. All right, next I'm going to talk about the double Bu Jongsao, or thrusting guard. My hands come up here, shoot straight ahead. Now they come up about, real close to one another, and they're chambered again in two directions, kind of like at Sulim Tao when we did the punch. Well, in this one, you're in open hand chamber, as much as it can down, as much as it can over, and then that whole assembly is then placed in front of your chest. And it shoots out to straight. So again, it starts out bent and ends up straight. This is the way Wing Chun movements work. They start out bent and end up straight when you go into a strike. Some people think like when Wing Chun punches that it goes like that, which is not quite correct. It starts out bent, but it ends up straight. It doesn't start out straight and end up bent. So that's important. Now, what we use this for is kind of as an extension of Tan Sao. Bu Zhong Sao is like another way of using Tan, but with a more extension of the arm. Now, for example, when we're closed here, and Pep gives me that strike, I can use Bu Zhong Sao to the inside of his arm, the same way I would use Bu to the outside. In other words, normally against this punch here, I would use a Bu Sao with this arm. But I don't like Bu Sao as much with this from the inside because it still gives him a little bit of freedom to get in. So when I'm trying to exclude with a Bu motion, I turn my hand out like that, and that helps just push him out a little bit further, which then can lead into those kind of wrap locks and things like that. Now you can also use this motion to create timing. One of the proverbs of Chum Kyu is, when there's no bridge, create a bridge. So, for example, when we're closed like this, and his hand is up, now there's no bridge. So I can use the Bu Zhong Sao to sort of poke in to create a bridge. Let's say you saw a dead bear laying in the middle of the street, or what you think is a dead bear. You're probably not going to go up and poke it on the shoulder and see if it's really dead. You might want to use like a long stick in case he's not dead. Well, that's kind of like what Bu Zhong Sao is. It's exploratory. So what I might want to do here, when I'm faced with something like the Pepstrosity, I may not want to just walk in face first. So instead, I might want to use like something a little bit longer to poke my way in and create that bridge and feel what's going to happen. So once I've made that contact with him, I know I can feel through my arm what his intentions are going to be and whether I should like run or whether I should go ahead and paste him. Now in this case, what I might do is bridge, go in and then get the throat or whatever. It doesn't matter what you do. Once you've touched his arm, the main thing is you figure out whether it's going to be safe to go in or whether you should retreat. So this is one of the ways that we use it. Now another proverb in Wing Chun is make the first move to gain control. So in this case, I made the first move to gain the control, whereas if I waited for him to hit me, it might be dangerous for me. I might end up getting killed. All right, another way that I would use the Bu Zhong Sao, this time in double, just the way it appears in the form, is to defend against a two-handed shove. Now a lot of fights start with a shove, so you can use Bu Zhong Sao to sort of capitalize on the guy's forward momentum by splitting his grip open, and that forces him to walk right into you. In other words, when Gavin shoves me, what that did was enabled me to take advantage of his momentum, catch him on the way in, and just follow up. Now another way that I might want to use this in sticky hands if my opponent was going for the tan, I could use that Biu Jung Sao to defend against it. See, what happened was he went for tan da, and I shot up Biu Jung Sao. That opened up the line. All right, next I want to talk about the Pai Jiang that comes from here and pivots to both directions. Now you notice at the beginning I go left over right here, and then I just pivot to the side, and again to the other side, and to the other side. Now Pai Jiang meaning hacking elbow. First of all, before I even talk about Pai Jiang as an attack, let's talk about its main purpose. What they're doing is introducing you to the correct way to pivot 180 degrees of the body for 90 degrees of the feet. In other words, my feet are only going 90 degrees, but my body's going the full 180. Now, what they're doing with this is they're providing you with a squareness gauge, almost like a level gauge. See, if you were doing it with your hands like this and you weren't experienced at pivoting, you might go like that, or you might lean forward or lean back too much. So this, in a way, is kind of like helping you settle your stance and stay correct and square. So we use it kind of like a protractor or a squareness gauge. Now, again, when I look down, what I'm going to see is sort of a rectangle, and then I see this kind of a 45 degree, that's my knee, within the rectangle. And that's how I can check my squareness and make sure that I'm pivoting correctly. Now when I use the elbow attack, mostly I'm using my forearm. It looks like I'm using the point of my elbow, but primarily I use the forearm. Now I could use that Pai Jiang attack either with either arm, against either arm. So you have elbow attacks off both sides with the traps on both of his. Now this is also called Wang Jiang, or horizontal elbow. I can use that elbow attack also as a defense. Say for example in sticky hands, there's one of the attacks where Keith tries to leak up with that uppercut. See, what he wanted to do was from here, he wanted to just drop underneath and nail me. So what I'm going to do when I feel that happen is just catch him with that Pai Jiang. And that's a good defensive motion. Now I can also use the Pai Jiang elbow to the body, nice and low. Let's say we're closed. I could bridge the gap with anything. Let's say a kick, plant trap hit, Hyundai, and then bang to the body with that elbow strike. So you can use that down low as well. All right, next I'm going to talk about the other half of the elbow motion while I'm pivoting. I just talked about Pai Jiang, which was the top of the two elbows, but when I pivot backwards, I also have something called Song Jiang, which is another name for it is Fun Jiang, the backward moving elbow cut. Now, sometimes I'll use a back moving elbow cut when I'm a little close to my opponent. Let's say that he threw the jab and I used bong, but I was a little closer than normal. Maybe he moved in. That's when I'll use that back cutting elbow in the same way as that I would normally use a Fun Sao. That's why it's called Fun Jiang. It's kind of like Fun Sao, but at a closer range. Now, in sticky hands, I like to use the combination of the two elbows, like in a triple version. See, from here I'll go 1, 2, 3. And that second of the three elbows here was like 1, 2. There was the Song Jiang, and there's the Pai Jiang again. So that segment of three elbows right there of me pivoting back and forth is shown right here. Now, another time that I'll use the Song Jiang is kind of as a throw. Let's say, for example, we're open and Gavin is using the outward instep kick towards the groin. So once I blocked and hit, re-trapped him here, I can use Fun Jiang to knock him down by stepping behind his foot. So really, you can use that anytime you get well behind him in your stance when you're open. All right, next I'm going to talk about the double Fun Sao, Seung Fun Sao motion from the side reference. Now, one of the things that this is teaching us now, in Siulim Tao level, we had the Fun Sao that went all the way across, but you were facing this way. Now this time, you have a shorter Fun Sao facing from the side reference. So this is introducing you to the fact that all of a sudden now you can fight from a side reference. That means, you know, you're facing the guy this way, then they're telling you you're hitting here, as opposed to hitting in front of yourself this way, which you did at Siulim Tao level. All right, now when Bob comes in, one of the things that they're showing you then is with that shorter Fun Sao from the side reference, you're chopping like this. But what they're really telling you is that you should chop through your target. So the only thing stopping my hands from reaching that full straightness is his neck. So when you hit with Fun Sao, it's not like you should make him the end of your motion, range of motion, but that you should hit at about this point so that your hand is actually like going through the target area. And that's what you really want, is that extra follow through. Now, this shows you also your maximum body pivoting range. Once I pivot and I go here, that's as far as I'm allowed to do anything. I'm not allowed to do anything back behind me. You know, once I've pivoted that far, that's the maximum hand travel I can get and still stay in proper Wing Chun structure. Now the Fun Sao itself, you know, you use it tons of ways. You've already seen me use it in Siu Lim Tao level and again now. But for example, if we were open and just a single jab came, you know, like after that Bong Sao, I go into the lop with the Fun Sao. So that's a very common usage of it. There was another one where if he blocked here, I would run to another Fun Sao, you know. Or even if I had done the single one here and the second shot came and I had to use Cow Sao, then I could split second release with another one of those Fun Sao chops. So there's lots of ways to have fun in Wing Chun. All right, next I'm going to talk about the twist down to Chum Jang, or sinking elbow from the double Fun. So you notice that my hands are extended and then I kind of draw them in and I twist them and I kind of bend my wrist. That's to add a little bit of extra twist and drop, like as we did in Iron Palm in the first tape series. Like when I do get a hold of my opponent's neck here and pull him down, what I want to do is not just, you know, bang him down with the elbow, but I want to add that twist and snap of the wrist to give that little bit of extra oomph to the blow. Now, one of the other ways that I use that motion is as a block. Let's say we're open and Kenny gives the low shot to my body. I'll use that Chum Jang to whack the guy's arm, and that's kind of a painful way to stop the guy's shot. Same thing against a side kick. He goes to side kick me, I can whack his foot with it, you know, and that puts the kibosh on his you know, lead leg kick for a while. Now, in sticky hands, every now and then, the guy will grab and chop you, and he'll have like a real strong grab and you can't get loose. Bang! You can use that to get your hand loose. So again, what I did here was once he grabbed me here, I just found I couldn't get loose, so I banged down with Chum Jang, and that freed my hand to come right in with the follow-up. And I showed something like that in my last tape series. Now, another time I might want to use this Chum Jang from a full extension to suck in like that is if I get a guy who's good at bobbing and weaving. Say we're closed. Now, if I did a jab and I was like a little bit close and the guy sort of ducked it out, you know, like that, like a lot of guys that are good at, you know, boxing or some other, you know, close range combat arts, they'll use the bob and weave. So what I can do then is once he's down, I can draw that elbow down to attack him. Now, straight out of the form, you notice that in the form, I'm going to turn around and go here. I go Pai Jang, Fun Sao, Chum Jang. You know, those three moves in a row. Now, I could show you how to use that exactly in real combat. Let's say we're closed. Say, for example, I came in and went pack and elbowed him. Follow with the chop, pull him down, elbow. Well, that's straight out of the form because you know, the first thing I did was the elbow strike, the chop, and then the Chum Jang. All right, next I'm going to talk about the Jeep Sao, or bridge catching hand motion, which is a combination of here a Hyun Sao into Jut Sao, and on the other side, Pao Sao. So what you're doing is circling your hand and then snapping back at a 45 and then throwing the other hand upwards like Pao Sao. So between the two of them, you create what's called Jeep Sao. Now this is bridge catching hand, and you use it as a hyperextension or break of the opponent's arm. Now let's say we're open. Now, when Mark gives me the jab and I came in and I scored with that chop, when that next one tries to come in, I can catch it with Jeep Sao. Then I can finish up in a number of other ways. Don't sweep him because he'll fall down and hurt himself. All right, next I'm going to talk about the three different Jing Jiang, or vertical palm strike, that I do here. You notice that in the first one, okay, it raises up and the other hand chambers in Wu Sao. The second one goes up and slightly at an angle, and the last one chambers while the third one goes up. So your hit kind of goes straight out and then up at the last possible minute. Now I'll show you what the three different applications are for these three different forms of Jing Jiang. Let's say that we're closed. The very first one is the idea of pulling the guy into the strike. And Jing Jiang is used against the taller guy to go upwards so that the heel of your hand gives that last minute raise up and hit. Now, for example, if Bobby were to have blocked that, that's when your second one comes in. That's an attack to the elbow. That shows you how to jack the elbow here. When you get him to full extension, you pull him to one side and hit here. Now the third Jing Jiang, you kind of can mix it together, like I just said in the previous segment. You can mix it together with Jeep Sao principle, and you can mix it together with Saukin principle, and you'll get this, what we call the waist trap. So from position here, when I'm doing my rolling with Bobby, if I see a gap between his elbow and body, I can slip in and go for the waist trap. And this is that pull and Jing Jiang that you see at the end of the form. Now, another way that I can mix together principles, if I mix it together with that Jeep Sao principle from last time, what I can do here is, again, from the roll, once I've attacked low here, I can brace and use that motion, jing jang, and trap here to break the neck. All right, next I'm going to talk about the pull to lan sao. Now, what I do is I go with a complete pivot and turn my body completely square to the other wall, and I turn my hands slightly outwards. Okay, that's called lan sao, which actually means banister arm, but we can call it bar arm or horizontal block or horizontal grab, depending on how you apply it. Now, one of the most important things about this movement is that it introduces us to the yin blocking reference. Now, when I talk about the concept of reference a little bit later, you're going to remember that lan sao is the first yin block that goes with the stance pivot. So it teaches us the way that certain movements, which are considered yin in nature, stay referenced to the body the exact way they did at Siu Lim Tao. See, this is the same movement you did here in Siu Lim Tao, but it just turns with the body. Whereas you learned in the punch earlier that the punch went to the same place it always went. In Siu Lim Tao, the punch went there. In Chum Q, the punch still goes there, but the body pivoted. In this case, in Siu Lim Tao, the lan sao went here, but in Chum Q, it goes there. So it goes with your body. So that shows you the split between yin and yang already. And the bong sao later on in the form, well, the next move in the form, is going to further cement that, and then I'll talk about it a little bit more. All right, now, lan sao is to lop, kind of what biu sao is to bong. Now, what I had said in the previous tape series was that biu sao was like our answer to a cross bong. And I showed how we didn't want to use bong sao against the cross arm, but we used biu instead. And lan sao is sort of similar to that when it comes to lop sao. In other words, from the inside, when I get a guy's arm here, I like to grab him this way with lop sao. But when I get the inside of his arm, I tend to use the lan sao structure more, because the line of my elbow gives me more grab power than when I pull down towards my waist. See, when I'm closed like this and I pull him this way, I get more elbow power and more body power by pulling him towards my waist, and I open the line better. But when I'm on the inside track, the way my arm is shaped, the way my wrist is, I put a little bit too much strain on my wrist and I weaken myself by pulling him down towards my hip. So lan sao is more effective from the inside, so we tend to use it that way. Now, that doesn't mean we always use, lan sao that way. Sometimes, like, I'll use it, let's say in lop, in a situation like, say the punch came here. If I want to open a certain target area, like the body, I'll use lan sao to pull the guy this way, because if I would have done lop, it would have gotten in the way of my punch, or helped him to stop this. So there are certain situations when you would still use lan sao from across like that. But most of the time, I tend to use it, from the inside. Now, in sticky hands, say, for example, when I'm doing my sticky hands, I'll use the lan sao here to open that line up. See, from the inside, enables me to go in. Now, another usage for lan sao is going to be shown right here on the retrap, because here I'm using lan sao to lay over. This kind of gives me an idea where his arm is right here. See, because this arm's laid across both of his. And if anything funny is going to happen, this elbow is going to tell me. And this hand is checking there. So the structure of it, that twisted out structure, it's very similar to what I do when I first turn in the stance in the form with the hand twisted outwards. So you see two kind of applications of it right there. Now let's say we're closed. And if I come in with my double pack, there's another time when I'll use that lan sao lay across. Because what I did is come in double hit, and then this one check both arms with a layover trap. So again here, I've got one arm laying on top of his, and the other arm is right here checking that hand. So we have that way of applying it. Now, another time when I might want to use lan sao in sticky hands is when my opponent tries the shoulder butt from over the top. Because when he does, I can use that lan sao just to go right up against his shoulder, prevent him from butting me in the chest. All right, that's all for now. So until next time, this is Randy Williams saying, be cool, but don't be no stool.
If you'd like to learn more in depth about the drills and techniques shown in both this tape series as well as my previous series, my 6-volume book set, Wing Chun Kung Fu, The Explosive Art of Close Range Combat, is available through Clean Ace Printing Press in Singapore.
Smokin'.